I'm from the bottom of the block where we really gang, where we don't never speak a word, we just let it bang. That's life up in the bottom where we could never hang. It's that before dishonor, swear to God I'll never rank. And boy, I'll never break, I'm built for this just like a tank. You diss me once, homie, you won't get another chance. And I won't even speak a word, I'll just let it blast. I put that on the bottle, homie, that I'm down to smash. And you come and test the water, see if it don't crack. And real G's never switch up, never take the stand. A real G keeps it solid, never rolls with rats. I'm true to the code, homie, never looking back. And ain't no dirt up in my name, homie, those are facts. I keep it G, homie, I don't never have to act. Ain't nothing like these suckers on the net that's spitting cats. Boosting up their name for the fame is considered trash. You already knew on where I stand. With the homies posted in the viral daily packing strats. Boy, la vida loca, it be crazy in my habitat. Dead before dishonor is my code and ain't no turning back. Dead before dishonor is my code and ain't no turning back.
G-File.
Now this right here is the city of Van Nuys. Now Van Nuys is home to several neighborhoods. You know what I mean? From the Barrio Van Nuys to the Haskell to the Vanoans to the Valerios to the Tokers to, you know, and several others. And the reason why we're here is that there was a tag banging crew that became a neighborhood that comes from this area. And that is the WPS neighborhood. WPS, what used to stand for Wicked Pot Smokers, Wicked Players, you know, and a bunch of other ones. But the one that you definitely hear the most is the Wicked Players, is what their neighborhood now stands for. They were a tag banging crew. Well, they started off as a stoner tagging crew that transitioned into tag banging and then, you know, into a neighborhood. They were roughly around since the 90s. Didn't become a neighborhood till around 2013, 14, roughly around there. They were a large tag banging crew, don't get me wrong. You definitely heard about them. You know, they were putting in work. At one point they were cool with the Barrio Van Nuys neighborhood. Some of them had even gotten into Barrio Van Nuys, because originally that was the plan. They were supposed to become a clique and get in, but I guess there was some misunderstanding between them, and some of them didn't want to get in, and they ended up having beef. Now, you know what I mean, heavy beef. But at one point, both of these what was a crew and, you know, gang, used to get along. You know what I mean. You know, they had a tight bond, but all of that fell apart, you know, because they were trying to get them in. Some of them probably didn't want to get in, and, you know, they probably told them, if you don't get in, there's going to be beef. And, you know, that's pretty much how it always happens. And the WPS neighborhood is the only neighborhood to ever like plant their flag in Barrio Van Nuys neighborhood, because Barrio Van Nuys is an old school neighborhood that is deep, that handles their business. But they managed to plant their flag right there, kind of like in the heart of their hood, because their neighborhood is what's considered Van Nuys to Kittredge to Hamlet, and all the way to Hazeltine. So what's in the middle is considered their neighborhood, right there through Haynes and Silmar Avenue, and close to the Van Nuys center is where you can find this neighborhood. Through those ends is where, you know, they roam around. You know what I mean? They're not as large as they used to be, but they do have a presence. You know what I mean? You do see the activity by them. They do have homies that are up. But like I said, they're not like what they used to be, but they're still up. You still could catch them doing their thing and representing for that WPS as that Wicked Players, and holding it down. Now here's one of the more smaller neighborhoods, right here in North Hills, the Panorama area. You have the WPS neighborhood. WPS neighborhood standing for Willis Boys. But when they were a tagging crew, they used to stand for Wicked Boys. Now these guys were never a tagging crew. They were always tag bangers. They were not about the graffiti. They were a banging crew. Since the gates, you know, the Wicked Boys. You know, they were roughly around the Van Nuys area, the North Hills area. You know, they were drifters until they recruited a few guys that lived on Willis Boys, and then they made it stand for Willis Boys. But Panorama is Blythe Street's hood, and right there on Willis, so that created tensions between the two hoods, and Blythe Street being a more larger old school neighborhood, you know, that dominates right there, kind of allowed their numbers just to, you know, stay at a minimum, because you roughly don't see these guys up no more. They always had a few in numbers. That's only because Blythe Street, you know, keeps their neighborhood sold up. But essentially, they are a neighborhood, and you do see it up there. A neighborhood that were around in the 2000s. Didn't become a neighborhood until like 2011, and it's still questionable if that even happened. But I was told that they did. They do have homies that are in there. Some that are doing all day. Um, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's who they were. They were the Wicked Boys, the BBS, and then they made it stand for Willis Boys, and that's the term that they go by now. But that's the Willis Boys right there. Now here we have an old school tagging crew that was around in the early 90s, which is DSM. DSM, standing for Don't Stop Mobbing, is what it originally standed for when they were taggers. Pretty good tagging crew. These guys had skills, and they had a lot of, they were strictly into graffiti. Somewhere roughly around the late 90s, started, turning more into gang banging with them and stuff like that. And then the 2000s, so like roughly around like 2010 and stuff like that, they full blown made the jump into neighborhood. Around like 2004 or 5, they became tag bangers, and then they became a hood. That now they stand for Desmadrosos. Before it was Don't Stop Mobbing, but now it stands for Desmadrosos. That's Varrios Desmadrosos. But these guys don't really have a specific location where they hang out. They kind of tend to just like roam around and represent where they land. I know they have one in Palm Hills, the same one as the one right here in the San Fernando Valley, but the San Fernando Valley is where they started from, the original home to them. You know what I mean? You were able to catch them in North Hills, in Van Nuys, in that part of the valley. And they did have huge numbers when they were tagging crew, but then when they became tag bangers, I guess some of them were feeling and they left. So they're not as large as they once were. But nonetheless, homie, they still represent right there and holding it down for that DSM, but that's Varrios Desmadrosos. Now here in Granada Hills, we have another neighborhood. This one was pretty old school, started since the early 90s, and it is a real neighborhood, even though for some odd reason there's a lot of people that really think that this neighborhood doesn't exist, but I could assure you it does. I have homies from here. They have homies that are busted. It's a real neighborhood, legitimately a neighborhood, and one of the only two neighborhoods, because there's only two neighborhoods in Granada Hills, the Harpies and this one, the DYP, which used to stand for Delhi Young Players, now it stands for Delhi Cyclones. But the original term, was the Delhi Young Players when they started. They are green raggers. They use the color green, for their neighborhood. So they're green ragging sureños. And they're located right here in Granada Hills, close to the high school and close to the park is where you can find, their neighborhood. Through those back ends is what's considered their neighborhood. I know there's the cribs right there too, throughout Balboa, Chatsworth, Devonshire. It's pretty much where you can find the DYPs. You could also find them in the SGV. You can find them in the 661. They have different locations. You know what I mean? This is an average sized neighborhood, so they do have a presence. They do have youngsters. They are active. Have been active since the early 90s. Didn't become a neighborhood until the 2000s. One of the first ones of these tagging crews to become a neighborhood. You know what I mean? So you definitely always heard about these guys. You know what I mean? Even though they're not as large, because some of them ended up getting into established neighborhoods like Diablos and certain other gangs. But nonetheless, some of these guys kept their fundamental original and kept pushing forward and obtained that status and continue to represent it. You know what I mean? But that's what's up with the DYP right here in Granada Hills, representing for the Delhi Cyclones and putting theirs on the map. And here we have one of the more newer neighborhoods in the San Fernando Valley. These guys don't have that long that they became a neighborhood. The crew in itself hadn't been, that old school either, since the 2000s. But they rose up the ranks quick and they earned a status. They're very active. They run mucks. You definitely hear about these guys. These guys, suckers. They got them young gunners and all that. And one of the few gangs that's in Mission Hills, them and Mission Hill Boys are probably the only two, plus the Asian neighbors. You have the Valley Kings, the Valley King Locals. Now the Valley King Locals is neighborhood is located on Havenhurst, and from Havenhurst to Lassen Street, from Lassen Street all the way to Devonshire, and from Devonshire I would have to say all the way to where the freeway's at. It's what's considered their neighborhood. So everything in the middle, it's their neighborhood, their turf, throughout Haskell, throughout Gloria, throughout all of those. You know what I mean? I know people even hear about the Gloria models. It's like, you know, but that's their neighborhood right here, throughout Woodley. The Valley Kings, like I said, they're a neighborhood that rolls up the ranks pretty quick, but they don't have that long that they've been up. Hey, but shit, they managed to, push that good push and keep representing for that Valley Kings. You know what I mean? That VK or VKLS. You see it different ways. They have always had this term. This was the term always meant. Valley Kings. And continue to represent theirs and put theirs on the map. You know what I mean? But that's what's up with the Mission Hill Valley Kings neighborhood right here, holding it down for that 818. And here's one that hasn't became a neighborhood, but I think I should mention it, only because they're large. They put in work. They have homies that are busted. They have their riders. They do put in a gang of work. You hear about these guys. They're a pretty old school crew that is large, which is the DC standing for delinquentes. DC, being right there in Sun Valley, right there on Wicks, almost by North Hollywood. It's where you can find them. You know what I mean, close to like where the Diablos neighborhood's at. Like I said, they were always a pretty large crew that you see their activity everywhere. You hear about them busting their, how gang members act, you know what I mean? How gangsters carry themselves. That's how this neighborhood carries themselves. You do hear about the activity by these guys, you know what I mean? These guys ain't no suckers, even though they're not a 13 yet or whatever. You might as well consider them a gang, because that's how they run and operate, you know what I mean? You think that they're just some lame taggers or something like that. That's what I always say, that just because you're a tagger doesn't mean shit. I mean, they'll put it down, homie. And that's without a doubt, you know what I'm saying? Because you definitely hear about these guys, and they have their numbers. They are large, DC standing for Delinquente, Dark City. But Delinquente is the one that you hear the most of. And they're still active, and they still continue to represent in the valley, and you still see them up, you know what I mean? Nothing has changed, and they still hold it down for that DC neighborhood right